Greetings and welcome to Maisha Kazini. Today we are pleased to welcome Mutemi Kiama, who is a community organizer, a teacher, and in my opinion, as a good storyteller. He is also known for his Twitter handles at Mutemi Kiama on Twitter and also at Wanjiko Revolt. So, Karibu Mutemi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rwandia. It's such an honor to be on this show that I've been following. I think I was among the first subscribers.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you.
All right. I've been listening to your interviews of late, and I've really been so keen to hear what you're saying about narratives, the way the media covers stories, and just even how Kenyans can organize to push back. So we need to start from understanding what kind of Kenya we are talking about that makes the stories we tell so important. So maybe you can just give us an overview of how did we get here where we are battling for the stories we tell. What is Kenya?
So thank you for that question. It's a very fundamental question in my opinion, because as African, our hangers say, if you don't know where you're coming from, then you don't know where you're going. And there's been a huge push towards, and I think you've advocated against this, to do away with our history, even as a subject in schools. And if you look at the people who are advocating for history not to be a subject, they are the people in power. And then you have to ask yourself, why don't they want us to learn our history? Why do they want us not to have memory? So understanding where we've come from and how we are here, I think helps us understand the struggles we are facing every day. And you know, Kenya was created initially the Imperial British East Africa Company came here, and they were looking for the source of the Nile, because they were being blocked by the Egyptians from using the British were being blocked from using the Suez Canal, and they were looking for, all they wanted was trade with India. They wanted to go and get spices and that kind of thing. And also at that time, the British Empire was receding across the world. They were actually finding it unviable. The colonial enterprise had become too expensive. They were finding it very unviable to also be in India. And so the company came here, and they found very pristine, rich place with so many resources. And they made a lot of money until the British, king, then the United Kingdom decided they have got to make the place a protectorate, because they could not let these guys just make money on their own. Although initially the IBA became broke because of the venture of trying to build a railway, and so it became a protectorate. And the whole idea.
So that when we became a protectorate, it was a business decision.
It was a business decision because
the British state now subsidizes this.
Yeah, the infrastructure that was being built, and essentially just to extract. If you look at the way the railway was, where it went, it's where the resources then, which was farming and a few minerals here and there, coffee and tea and wheat and whatever could be, and sheep, if you talk about Delamere and Naivasha, and then Uganda, was to get those resources to the coast, to Mombasa, and then ship them to Britain. So essentially this country was created to extract from either the White Islands and part of Uganda. But it's also important to realize that unlike many other colonies, I think Kenya and Zimbabwe are unique in that the white men came here to settle, to make a home. In other places they just went to extract or if you talk about Australia, it was a prison colony. The undesirables in Europe, and most probably you and I, if it was that time, would be for questioning, would be in those prisons. Anybody who questioned and wouldn't agree with the governance in Europe was shipped to those countries. But in Kenya, the elite came to settle. And so they tried to create a version of Britain, Kenya, New Zealand, I think, Zimbabwe, and like others like Ghana, whereby it was purely extraction of cocoa and whatever it is that they were extracting there. The British came, settled, built, they had estates here, similar to Britain, whether it's tea estates or coffee estates or that kind of farms. And then they tried to create a black underclass that would serve their interests using education. But you also remember at the time the British were coming here, as I said, the empire was contracting. It had become too expensive. They had developed ways of ruling by proxy, of colonializing by proxy, based on their experience in India, where they had been for 300 years. So they had learned that what you do is you take, first of all, you take the best, the brightest, go and educate them in the UK, and then bring them back and make them rule their own people. So take them to London School of Economics, take them to Oxford or wherever, and then bring them back. So at that time, as the British decided to settle here, they started educating, and started education system to serve those kind of purposes, but also to provide them with the kind of literate in terms of being able to read and write English, or maybe do basic maths that could serve either in their farms, their business ventures, or in the colonial administration that they were establishing. So I know you're very passionate about education. And a lot of us have grown up traumatized for not being able to pass in quotes, some of these, we sit exams that we don't pass. But it's an education system that was designed to pass only a few people. If they needed 100 clerks, then the education system would be, the pass mark would only allow 100 clerks to pass. If they needed 1,000 teachers with the college education, then the education system would only pass 1,000 people. And I think that is what we've been struggling with, the trauma of not being educated for knowledge, but being educated for labor, as I think the conversation has been going on. So these guys had mastered this. And so that is the Kenya that was created to the point where if we talk about Jomo Kenyatta and one other person who I don't know, because they've not really been captured word in history, who was sent to Britain by the Kenya African Union, Kikuyu Association, to negotiate on their behalf in terms of Kikuyus getting back their land. And Jomo Kenyatta disappears for 15 years and then comes back, having learned the ways of the British and all that, even married a Briton. Yeah, even married a Briton, and then he comes back here and he's a totally different person. And I think that's the person then they hand over. And you remember the first statement he issued when he met the settlers was that we want you guys to feel comfortable here. We are not going to go after anybody's land or anything like that. And that shocked a lot of the people who had been fighting for land and freedom, the Mau Mau. And up to date, they're still shocked because they never got their land back. So yeah, so understanding that I call it the colonial enterprise, the extractive colonial enterprise was created, was a business venture. And Kenya was a going concern, and it still is.
Yes.
Then helps us understand some of the inhuman things that happens to us. And people are like, how can these people do this to us? Because businesses work for profit, maximizing profit. And how do you maximize profits? You reduce on costs, and you reduce on costs by reducing on labor, inputs, and all that. So you're not going to invest a lot on educating a population if it's a business venture. You're not going to, you don't want intellectuals, you don't want people who question, you don't want people who are writing poetry, you don't write, I mean, that's a waste of resource, educating people to write poetry when they should be educated to, to produce and be taxed. And then those taxes feed that is the extraction, because the taxation is the extraction. Someone is working somewhere and earning a salary, and then they pay taxes. So you're taking from them and taking it somewhere. So what we call independence, which nobody fought for, I keep saying that nobody fought for independence. Everybody fought for land and freedom. But we were given independence because if you look at who really would have wanted independence, most probably it's those who are working for the white man. They'd have wanted the independence to be to replace the white man in all those places like Modega Club or Current Club or in the mansions, the colonial mansions that they were living in. And so when we got independence, those who had that basic education or some form of formal education are the ones who the white man handed over to. They are the ones who keep celebrating independence today, but the people who actually fought for land and freedom got practically nothing. And that class, which is now Black colonial class, has kept us in the same state. We keep fighting. A few of us rise up above this, but most of us are self-educated. Those who question, we have to seek knowledge actively. Because the education system that we have does not contain the kind of information that will liberate you. And I learned that with a saying that there's a saying, something to the effect that the person the one who was enslaved, you cannot educate you to be able to liberate yourself.
Yeah. And in fact, the way the system is designed, even exams, the way exams are designed, it's so that you don't go beyond the syllabus you have been given. Because see, now you're worried about passing exams, so you can't pick a book which is outside the syllabus and say, I'm going to read this. You'll be reminded, no, we are doing exams and this won't come in the exam. That's
you remember
the purpose of exams.
Yeah, and our education system, our school structure, let's say you're in primary school, you do the primary school exam, depending on the pass mark, you go to either provincial school or a district school or a Rambe school or a national school. And all these things, what is taught in these schools, basically, if you think about it, it's how to conform, because it's how, as you're saying, if you follow that syllabus and read those books and regurgitate everything that they say, then you pass. And if you have the best at regurgitating what they are saying, then you're number one. And then you follow that all the way to university, and you end up either becoming a top executive in some of these companies, a lot of them that are British or British affiliated, or you go to government and become a PS, and you become the Nyapara, So you have a very education system that looks for conformity. I was talking to someone who think about what we call reform schools. I don't know that they still
the
exist.
approved schools.
Approved schools. Yeah, it's the approved schools. And what kind of person ended up in those approved schools? And I wouldn't be surprised anybody who questioned, like I or you, at that time would actually, because if the teacher tells you this is what I'm saying and you question, then you'll be labeled a rebel. Or the society, the wider society, let's say that you're questioning either your elders or something in a society that say don't question elders. So you'll be called a rebel, and then you end up in an approved school, which was a prison. So actually, intellectuals were imprisoned by this colonial system.
Wow. So would you say there's, I don't know if you've noticed any difference in terms of political outlook between Kenya and other African countries? I mean, why does Kenya often feel so like we are so white? Like we feel like a British, province.
I remember when I was in high school in the 90s, in the late 80s, actually, speaking English with a certain accent. If you came from Nairobi or an urban center and you spoke English with a certain accent, you kind of looked special or treated in a special way. Regardless of whether most of those, like the school I went to, which was in Murang'a in Jiris, majority of the people were Kikuyu, had gone to village schools. A lot of the kids who came from towns were sons of the middle class. They were the people who could afford, most probably, to corrupt the headmaster so that their sons could come to that school. And usually, in terms of marks, they are not performed very well. They are not qualified to come to that school. The other kids had passed, those pass marks and attained that level. So and I think again, this is a legacy of the independence narrative of the collaborators who learned to love the white man's ways and wanted independence to be the white man, and I think competed even to be the ones that the white man hands over to, because they could speak English in a certain way. They had adopted certain mannerisms of the white man, and basically the white man could trust them with, looking after his stuff. And I think we made that a thing in Kenya, whereby if you look at the guys who are in charge at independence, and so-called independence, the first government and all that, and the people who are appointed either ministers or permanent secretaries, there was a thing of trying to be quite British. If you look at the class that was running the companies, if I can mention names, the Jeremiah Kirene, the Mishukis, the Joe Wanjigis, who are some of them who are still influential today. And these are guys who, for example, John Mishuki had been at the first, I think, African DO, then African DC. And if you watch those videos of him, those days, if you watch, he actually looks like a white man in black skin, speaks mannerisms, is very white. And I think that also featured when he talks about when you rattle a snake, prepare to be bitten. That was a very British kind of statement. And those are role models. Those are the people we look up to and want to be like all over Kenyan villages.
I believe when you look at the civil servants and the policies they implement, they're always telling us they benchmarked. And normally it's just policies they got direct from the UK or the US. Yeah.
Education is your thing. I mean, the CBC thing was introduced by, I think the original thinking behind it was the British Council. UNESCO. Why, if we are independent, this is 2016, why in 2016 are we getting education policy from the British Council when you have so many PhDs in education, in curriculum development, who are, Kenyans? I mean, don't we trust our own people? Why do we need to get the white man to come and tell us what education system to have?
Well, so okay, you've talked about Kenya being set up by the corporate class, and they're the ones who need to maintain the kind of extractive relationship we still have with the state. So this requires the control of narratives, that what we say about ourselves has to be very regulated. What is the story they want to keep projecting that Kenya is? Because what you've talked about is the reality of Kenya, but what is the story that they try to project, especially to the outside world, or even to us?
So if we look at the attempts, first of all, to control narratives all over, if you look at what liberation entails, it entails being able to define what liberation, what freedom is, what independence is, who is the enemy, if I can use that word, and who are the collaborators of the enemy, who are the facilitators, because the British could not rule on their own, so they needed Africans who could help them subjugate the rest of the populations. And a lot of these guys are the guys who control capital today, because the sons and daughters of the colonial chiefs, you remember there was the divide and rule. And the divide and rule meant the British identified some Kenyans and empowered those Kenyans to lord it over the others so they can then rule by proxy. And these who are enabled, who became chiefs, and then they were given, they were given askaris, and then they were empowered economically so they could be able to control those zones that they controlled. It's their sons and daughters who went to school. The original chiefs might not have gone to school, but their sons and daughters are the ones who went to school first. And these are the ones that were handed over to at independence. And now these are the ones that basically stole the independence from the people who fought, or rather the liberation from the people who actually fought for land and freedom. The Kemadis and the Kagias and the Ochieng Anekos and the who. But the people who actually took over, if you remember the treatment of Billard Kagia, Ochieng Aneko, Jaramogi Odinga, and others, they were treated very badly at independence, yet they were freedom fighters. So you can imagine, how the rest of us were being treated. And these are the guys who, because they told the story of freedom, struggle for freedom. Yeah. And they have to maintain that lie to date.
Oh.
They have to maintain that lie. So if we say, as you keep saying, and it's emerging.
Just pause, that's such a deep point. So the story is there that the reality, Kenyans fought for freedom. But the people who took the story were not the ones who fought for it.
They're not the ones who fought for it. If you think about it, if Jomo Kenyatta was not a freedom fighter, and there's evidence of this, there are videos of the actual Mau War Council leaders like Kubai and Kagea saying he was not one of them. Yet the Mzungu cast him as the leader unto darkness or something like that. So the Mzungu actually created the narrative. So talk about creating narrative that Kenyatta was a freedom fighter, but why? For what reason? And a story is told. If you speak to a lot of people like Professor Maina Kenyatta, they will tell you that what these guys were doing was that they needed to cast Kenyatta as a liberator. So Kimathi had to die, and they had to create freedom heroes, in quotes. The story goes that Kenyatta's incarceration in Kapenguria was actually to create for him that street credibility as a liberator, but also to protect him from the Mama, because the Mama knew who he was, and he was pretending to be one of them, and they wanted to kill him. So you create narratives. And if you say then that the independence that we got in 1963 was false, then Kenya is alive today. We've been living a fake narrative for the last 6 decades. That's how deep it is.
Good. This is oh my God. I had never actually thought of it that way. It's this hijacking of stories. So people build the story, and then now somebody comes and grabs it and says, I'm the one who fought.
Yep. And even when the people who are saying we are the people who fought. So you can imagine 60 years ago when the actual Mau were saying, this guy is not one of us. But because the British controlled the media and they knew why they were installing Kenyatta because it would protect their interests, in Kenya. And that's it. That time, I think, using radio and newspapers, the Standard, then the oldest newspaper in Kenya, I think Nation owned by the Aga Khan. You have to ask yourself, who was the Aga Khan? Would he have invested in Kenya if he wasn't sure that his investment would be secure? And the Ismailis, how did they come to Kenya? Who did they align themselves with? Were they aligned to the Africans, or they aligned to the British colonial class? And when you look at these things deeply, then you start seeing how narratives are controlled and the shape to serve who and to protect who. And if we've been living a life for 60 years, it becomes harder and harder to maintain that life.
Yeah, and so you keep needing more force.
Despite an education system. Yep. Which I think is the struggle with CBC. It's a matter to it's an attempt to dumb down the population even more, so that we don't really, question or produce a young generation that is going out there to seek knowledge. I think I've seen you have this conversation.
Yeah, even in BBI, there was a very insidious line that nobody paid attention to, where the proposal, and in fact, it wasn't in the main proposals, it was at the back, where they had this implementation plan. One of the implementation plans was to appoint an official historian from the office of the president, that is the president who appoints the historian, and that the archives, the control of the archives moves to the office of the president, and that the official historian will write the history of Kenya for the last 1,000 years. Of course, there was.
I saw it. I'm glad you saw it.
Yeah. Me, I look. The first thing I look is where is education, where is culture. It was one of the first things I saw. So basically,
there's this thing they are building. This thing they are building at Uhuru Gardens.
Yes.
And I think bits and pieces of it have come out. I think it's a monument of the official history of Kenya, because there are memorials of Kenyatta and whoever and all these official heroes of this country who are the collaborators. And you ask yourself why it's being protected by people with guns. I have no idea.
And that was where people of Kibra used to relax for the afternoon. That's so bad.
Yep.
Their space was taken.
So narratives, education controls narratives, dumb down the population, and then you have a population, like you asked about our politics, that does not question or accepts official narratives. You have Kenyans who don't trust. I don't know what to call this. You have Kenyans who don't trust the government at all. But if the government issues a statement, that becomes what they go by. Because we've not been taught to think or question, or once we disagree with an official narrative, we don't know what to do. So you just agree. You just move on with it, move along with it.
Okay. So basically, you would easily say that Kenya is a country of spin and PR. It's about spinning the stories, doing public relations to make people believe a certain thing.
So if you look at the current government, which is a very adept at spin, we remember the white shirts and red ties in 2013, and the accept and move on narrative, but behind that was a very slick PR machine, Cambridge Analytica. Now people have come to learn, and these are British PR machine, and it was all about. So as you've come and you said, Jomo Kenyatta was a fake narrative. He was never a freedom fighter. His son is president. So president, son of the founding father. But if Jomo Kenyatta was not the founding father, then what legs will Uhuru stand on, And then if you start looking deeper, scratching the surface, you start seeing Uhuru, the Cambridge Analytica and Uhuru's presidency was built on the ICC. Once his name was in the Ocampo envelope, the Kenyatta machine moved to make sure that their son does not get convicted. And the Kenyatta machine had Kibaki in power. Kibaki was their project from the word go, from 1992, because the son of Wanjiko Matiba was a peasant was most likely the person who was most likely to have won the election in 1992, and they had to split the Kikuyu vote. So the Kenyatta sponsored Kibaki, and Kibaki, of course, had to reciprocate in 2009 when Uhuru's name was found in Ocampo's envelope. And so Cambridge Analytica, which had a history of rescuing despots across the world, rehabilitating their image, one of the slickest PR machines, manipulating social media algorithms and all that, came to Kenya. And you can be sure they weren't cheap. Whoever paid for them, they weren't cheap. Kenya did what it did. Completely destroyed the integrity of the international criminal, ICC, between 2013 and 2015, and people could not believe that a small country with so few resources could be able to take on such an international institution and totally destroy it. But that's the power of the colonial state that we still are, because it's not just us, it's Britain. It's the people who have interest here, who have interest to ensure that the president we have is someone that they can control, and is someone who protects their interests. So it was not just, it was the war on terror, but that Western machine mobilized to make sure that Uhuru Kenyatta came out of that ICC, of which America is not a member, interestingly enough.
Yeah. They refuse to join.
Narratives, controlling narratives.
So I want us to talk about some of the narratives and the way they have been, certain events have been reported in the local media and the international one. Maybe we could just start with the hot topic of the day, which is CBC. What is your sense of the line that the media is walking on, the Kenyan media?
So you and I began engaging on CBC even before it was implemented, when it was at the proposal level. And I remember asking, the first thing you were asking for was the philosophy behind CBC. And for a long time, nobody could give you that. In fact, they rolled out CBC before they even had a philosophy and developed it in retrospect. But interestingly enough, in the task forces that were discussing the change in curriculum and all, some media houses had their editors represented in those task forces. And that's a strategy whereby if you want the media on your side, then you make sure that you allow whoever is going to write the stories about what you're doing is in your space. So what happens is that if you're in a committee or a task force, you're bound by the decisions of that committee or task force. So if the editor of the Nation or the Standard or the Star or whichever media house is in that task force, when the task force produces its report, they are bound by the results of that task force. They usually say, if you have questions to raise, you raise them from within. So that by the time you communicate out there, then you're all speaking in one voice. So that was a clever strategy. And I think part of the reasons why the Nation and the Standard can never criticize CBC is because their editors were part of the decision making in terms of rolling out CBC, those task forces that were determining whether to roll out. But also beyond that, again, if you go on to say that the British Council designed the philosophy behind CBC came from the British Council initially, and then you're saying Kenya is still a British colony, and the British still exert a lot of influence in this country, then you also see, in terms of media ownership, the Standard used to be the very British paper. Then it was bought by people like Moi, the powers that be. And Moi is one person who I think we kind of misunderstand the role he played in the 24 years. Now, it's like, if you think about it, like the British could not hand over to someone they don't trust, then Moi starts to look like he was one of their projects, because Moi basically ran Kenya, even when Kenyatta was president, because Moi and Kibaki were the guys who were actually doing the actual work. And Moi was, remember, Moi was in charge, what Moi was minister for as vice president. You know, he was a minister for home affairs. So he was minister for jailing people. He was in charge of our prisons. Would the British have put someone in charge of prisons if they don't trust that person and let them rule for 24 years, you know? Now, and Moi, remember Moi saying, don't trust these Wazungus. That was after the attacks on his presidency towards the 90s. But I think what I'm coming to realize that most probably who was saying these guys had promised me this and now they're betraying me by sponsoring others. So education, media owned by the political elite, these stories being told, you know, so you have a political elite that does not want a population that is awake. They own media. We are complaining about CBC, that it's dumping down our kids, but the media you're complaining to is owned by the same political elite. What do we expect? Of course, they are not going to amplify these stories, you know. So CBC would work in a country, for example, somewhere like Finland. If you live in one area, one city, or it doesn't even matter where you live, whether it is city or up country in Finland, all schools are standard. All schools have the same infrastructure. So it doesn't matter whether you live in Turkana or Wajir or Nairobi or Kisumu. If you relocate to Kisumu, you'll find the same kind of school with the same kind of infrastructure and facilities as the one that you left in Nairobi, and it's the same one you'll find in Turkana. So in such a space, you can introduce CBC. Then you can be telling people to, you know, to the kind of assignments our kids are being given that require, you know, certain infrastructure that is not available in 90% of Kenyan homes or Kenyan spaces. So that's my take on CBC. It's basically meant to, again, perpetuate the inequality that is in this country and make sure that a few still have an advantage over the rest of us, and especially at this time when the information revolution has made knowledge available, and yet what you're doing is making sure that this knowledge is not accessible to the majority of Kenyans.
So it was not a coincidence that you know, all these stories come out, then you see the Editors Guild having a meeting with KICD.
I mean, if you look at even the pushback that we tried to do in 2016 and the kind of responses we used to get and the blackout that we used to get in the media and especially in the papers, in the newspapers, it's not an accident. It's because, you know, we have very bright people who work for this government, very highly educated, PhDs, some with several PhDs who've studied in some of the best colleges on this planet. So you don't, I tell people, let me use BBI as an example. When you're the president of Kenya and you're pushing BBI, does it mean that you don't have lawyers who are bright enough to tell you that the courts are going to reject this thing? Or was it part of the design for you to push this thing and then it gets rejected? And then what's the game? Because, I mean, you must be having very intelligent advisors in your spaces. So these things are never by accident. Government plans long-term, you know, and they are very bright. Unless we say we have complete idiots in our government, which I don't believe, you know. So again, it's all about narratives and long-term planning. So government always plans long-term, maybe 10, 15 years, 20 years. And so what is a plan? That's the question you should be asking.
Wow. Then the other story I wanted us to talk about was the Kianjokoma brothers. What was your sense of the way it was reported in the local media and the blackout that it received in the international media? I was so surprised when, when the Nigerians had their own Kianjokoma brothers, the end SARS was reported in all news media, but that story of Kenya's was not in any media house, international media house, except Al Jazeera.
And that's a sad thing about our media, which is populated by us, people like you and I. The Kianjokoma story is telling in many ways. First of all, for 2 days, the media didn't touch it.
Yes.
Until the villagers in Embu went and I think they overturned a police vehicle and then burnt it, and then it trended on social media. And that's when the media picked it up. That doesn't mean the story had been there, but they had refused to engage with it. But this is just how they do, because what happened in Kianjokoma actually happens in Huruma, Mathare, Korogosho, and these other spaces every day. And the media never reports. We have a media that does not even go deep into analysis, because if you think about it, these young men had been or just leaving school. There are no opportunities. They started a business. What happened on that night was that they got their first take, and I believe that's what the cops wanted to steal. Their first take, like the first money they earned from their butchery. Have you seen that story anywhere? Nowhere. But the worst is the international media. Nothing. And not only that, you see the way you report the brutality of Ugandan police when they're beating up Bobi Wine and all that. Our Kenya media reports it. But when it's happening to us, nobody reports it. When it's in Migori, nobody reports it, because it's not in the interest of the powers that be. And I think there were laws way back that made sure that as a media station, you could not own a newspaper, a TV station, and a radio station. I don't know whether those laws still exist or they were changed. And these used to be international, even in Britain, until Rupert Murdoch came along and started consolidating media and those laws. And I don't know what the position is in Kenya. But what that does is that once the one editor in Nation decides this is the story, then they can control the narrative in the papers, in the radio stations, and in the TV stations, and I think what I've heard right now in Kenya is that NSIS is very much in the media houses, in the newsrooms. So I don't know whether you've watched TV at one point whereby you circle through all the TV stations and you find the story, they almost have the same headline. Or you find the papers having the same headline, almost a similar headline. And the story is like all those stories is like they were written by the same people, or people who are sitting around one table. So that's the challenge. Our papers do not report for us. They report for the owners of those who are the political class. They report for the people who advertisers. You asked about CBC. The business class in that case is the publishers. And I read something that was very shocking, that textbooks nowadays have places where you write on the textbook. You make notes on the textbook. And what that means is that book cannot be handed over. Like if I have a kid who's in class 5, that kid cannot hand over to the kid in class 4 because they've already written their things on. That means next year you have to buy a new copy of the same textbook. And all these things are being built in for commercial purposes. That's the transactional extractive thing, narrative that you're talking about, whereby you have now a media that is captured that way because they're beholden to advertising. You have a media that does not care about parents because, the person who pays for advertising, it's the publisher and maybe KICD, not the parent, who's a parent anyway, Tanunua Gazette and that go. The only thing they do is buy the Gazette. They don't realize that part of the reasons why they're unable to sell papers and nobody trusts them anymore is that kind of thing, because this parent is a thinking person.
Yeah, in fact, I've seen people saying they wait for social media. They wait to check for news on social media because they don't trust the mainstream press.
And we've deliberately made social media that space for us, for the citizen. I was part of a project in 2013 that deliberately, when, the media for a long time was called the fourth estate. And the role of the fourth estate, the first estate being the executive, then parliament as a second, judiciary as a third, and the fourth being media, which was a space for citizens to agenda set, to question, to articulate issues of the citizen. And I think the media stopped doing that, and we had no choice but to make social media the space for us to be doing that.
And now, before we go to the international media, I wanted to hear your comments on the elections, the stories that are told. For example, this tyranny of numbers story, which was brought into the Kenyan space with a lot of drama, and it was projected like it is the truth, it is the unchangeable truth, and we are not even allowed to ask if the numbers add up.
I mean, for a long time, the population, remember this was around 2013. And there's always been this narrative that the Kikuyu are the most populous community in Kenya. So in 2013, the numbers in terms of what Uhuru Kenyatta needed to win an election were not promising for them. If you remember, the support he had was from Kikuyus, if you can do tribal maths, and Kalenjins. And then those are two communities, and then the rest of Kenya was on Raila's side. So we needed a narrative that would give the impression that Kikuyus and Kalenjins can constitute more than 50% of the population of Kenya, or voters for that matter, which is a total lie. I mean, tyranny of numbers, whatever. And that means the rest of Kenyans don't have numbers, because it would mean that actually right now, as we speak, then Kalenjins and Kikuyus are more than half the population of Kenya, which is a lie. So how do you then create a narrative that feeds what you're going to do, which is rig the election? Then you have to create that impression that you have the numbers, even though you don't have the numbers. So that's the tyranny of numbers. Today we are seeing polls saying that Ruto has 69%, Raila has 35%. Yet we know Ruto's support comes from Rift Valley, among the Kalenjin, and bits of Kikuyu. So how can that total to 69%? Where is the rest of the support coming from? And if people buy these lies and whatever, then it becomes easier to, for example, if Ruto is a state project, although we are being told he's fighting with Uhuru, but maybe there are people who are saying that most probably Uhuru is campaigning for Ruto by victimizing, making him a victim. Kenyans love victims. We love victimhood, and so they are casting him as a victim. It's ironical that the deputy president of Kenya is now the leader of opposition in this country. I think that would be, if that happens to be that it's a game we are being played, then it would be the most insidious, but also the most intriguing PR narrative ever created in this country. And I wouldn't be surprised, because if you look at the team that is managing Ruto's communications, they came straight from State House and went to his mansion. They used to work for Uhuru, now they're working for Ruto. So what fight is there? A lot of them are employed by the government. Quite a number of them. Ruto is using state resources. Ruto has been campaigning every day. IBC does nothing about it, because the law says you can only campaign for 3 months to the election. Ruto campaigns every day. Nobody questions him. He has not been sanctioned by anything. So tyranny of numbers is a fake narrative that prepares the ground for rigging, so that when they rig, then you can always repeat the
results. You massage the results to fit the narrative.
yeah, to fit the narrative.
But why
You
is
know,
the
so
US why is the US so invested in this story? Because the way Godek was pushing it, it seemed rather odd to me.
so remember that the fact that, first of all, the British came here to live in Kenya. They didn't come here to, it was not the kind of colony Kenya was created. So if you look at what Kenya is geopolitically, it's a base of operations for the US, the British, and all these other guys. From Kenya, they operate in the region. They go to Congo, fly into Congo and come back, fly into Somalia and come back, fly into South Sudan and come back. In fact, majority of the South Sudan government is right here. What is in South Sudan? Oil. What is in Somalia? You know, some of the biggest deposits of untapped deposits of natural gas. That's why you are fighting over a border with Somalia. I know you're saying either the border should go this way or should go this way because of what is in the sea. And that's all the US is interested in. I mean, the US has never been interested in anything but natural resources. And you remember, even when Raila, in 2017, when Raila kind of showed he's not going to accept the results, he was threatened. I don't know, they're not going to allow him to travel abroad. They might even freeze his accounts and all that. Until the Supreme Court ruled that the election was fraudulent. He was being marshaled to conform. And even after that, after what happened to the Supreme Court judges when Supreme Court could not get quorum and he refused to participate in the second election, and he was under a lot of threats. Why? Because Uhuru Kenyatta has always been the preferred leader for these guys because he's a prince. His father was a king, and Uhuru Kenyatta is a prince, and he's a prince of the British Empire.
And then, you know, even the way the international media, when the results came out and Raila disputed them, the international media made so much noise, calling him names, telling him he's a sour grapes, he never accepts, he's leading a cult of his ethnic group. And then when the
Supreme Court
ruling came out, then New York Times apologizes. So it's like the international media is also fed the same story to report about Kenya.
The international media reports what America or Britain wants. They are patriotic in that way. Whatever the American foreign policy is, the British foreign policy is, that's what the New York Times and the Washington Post will articulate. They always take the position, and especially the liberal position. So usually it's the Democratic Party's position. But also, when you look at America in terms of foreign policy around natural resources, it doesn't matter which government is in power, because it's corporations that that call the shots. It's whoever. These guys, even here in Kenya, they fund all sides. They fund. I remember being very intrigued. I was not very political in 2007. I think that's what actually shocked my system. That's where I started waking up. But I remember seeing contributors to Kibaki's campaign and Raila's campaign, and the names were the same, and the amounts were the same. And I was like, what's going on here? Though there are two sides, why would this Asian contribute same amount, 100 million to Raila, and then contribute 100 million to Kibaki? Why would Moi contribute to Kibaki and to Raila? I was at space in 2000 and in the NRM in 2017 when we were planning, and I was there, and I can tell you, I had an offer. There was an offer that was put on the table to finance the NRM up to 1 billion shillings, and that money was supposed to be coming from Moi. Yet NRM was organizing against Uhuru, who is his political project. Yeah, that's how shocking it was, because I was the money was saying, Mzee is ready to put in 1 billion, and through one of his unknown sons.
Gosh, so this is like a monarchy almost, and
It is a monarchy.
oligarchy.
Uhuru
So,
has been trying. BBI was about trying to get Gideon Moi into power because they know he's so colorless, he cannot inspire, he cannot be voted on alone. So how do we squeeze this guy in? Because I think these guys have a promise. He power quick change between Kenyatta's and Moi's. So it's a monarchy of two, maybe, of two families. And the Odingas being the third. Because there's a question on here. I like was if Jaramogi Oginga was an intellectual in the 60s, was among the then intellectuals, and knew who the British were. And there was a game being played by the British to install Kenyatta. Why did Jaramogi say Kenyatta Tosha, unless he was part of the British project also?
I've always had that suspicion.
You know? Yeah, so there's also that question. So that's the third, the dynasty narrative then takes shape, which is without siding with the hustler narrative, but that's the reality. We have like 3 royal families in this country.
So can you say something about, the international media houses, like BBC has its Africa headquarters here. It has decided to deliberately populate social media. They have a deliberate social media policy. So just comment about that whole infrastructure.
That is so shocking even when you consider like education, British Council, media, stories are being told by the BBC. There's something very wrong with that, especially if you are independent, But also Nairobi is a lot of the bureaus for the foreign media houses are right here in Nairobi. Some are in Joburg, Nairobi, Nigeria, and I don't know whether Egypt still has some, but it's the 4 corners of Africa where geopolitically the West have positioned themselves. And Kenya, as an island of peace, and the narrative that keeps being perpetuated, means that there's a let me be polite. There's a saying that you do not go to you do not poop where you're eating or where you're sleeping. So the media, the foreign media, deliberately does not cover stories of corruption and all that. Part of my arrests, the other time I was arrested, the second time I was arrested, was that the story of the IMF and the resistance by Kenyans actually went to the foreign media, the Bloombergs and the Fortunes and other, the Washington Post and the New York Times picked up those stories of Kenyans saying no to IMF loans, IMF intervention. Although there was I think we misunderstood there, because IMF comes in after you're already in trouble. So who was giving us loans? The Eurobonds, the World Bank, the other arm of the 3 arm, the sister of IMF or the brother of IMF, was the one that was giving us loans, has been giving us loans that are being stolen. If you look at the health sector, they keep giving us loans. We keep questioning, where is that money going? They don't care, because as long as the loans will be paid, it's none of their business. The money is stolen, then they give more loans. Then the IMF comes to tax our fuel. So I think these stories don't make the international media. Because why? Because the media would rather stay here, have their work permits, maybe even be assured of the fact that, because Uhuru's government has been very ruthless in terms of even deporting some of these guys. Those stories are never told, by the way, but I've heard of stories where journalists have been told, like, take off, just leave. And then when you go out, and then when you come back, you're denied a permit to get into the country. So yeah, like Miguna, I mean, so that's they are very brutal. This government is very brutal in such areas. So you find the lack of solidarity with the people of Kenya, and the more solidarity with the ruling elite.
So in fact, it seems like the government reacts when a story gets into international media. But as long as the story doesn't go beyond Nairobi, it won't act. And that's why it can afford to keep ignoring us.
I mean, they've been controlling media houses. Last time I heard, Nation was owed over 2 billion in advertising by the government of Kenya. So that is used as a carrot and stick, and not so. If you're an enterprise that thrives on advertising, so they've already controlled the local media. So how do they ensure that these stories don't get to the international media? Yet they don't advertise in the international media. Then they have to use now things like work permits and that kind of thing to make sure that people know that if you leak a story, then there'll be consequences. So you can make sure that those stories never get to the international. I never reported internationally. I've seen Fortune. I think it was 2 months ago when Fortune, I think Fortune Africa or something, reported on how Uhuru Kenyatta is good for business in Kenya, and you're wondering what they are reporting for, because all the other reports, even local media reports, is how bad things are, how businesses are going under. So you realize that's a PR story, so, and of course that was before the attempt to get another Eurobond. Nowadays, you don't even talk about Eurobonds. Now this government just borrows to pay loans, you borrow to pay the loans that you had borrowed. So you have to control the narrative to be able to operate in that space.
Wow. It sounds so pervasive, but Kenyans have been pushing back. So maybe you could talk about, how Kenyans have, especially KOT, has become the real opposition party, or is it? Yeah.
So yeah, so in 2013, I had a platform that was very powerful, Wanjiku Revolution, and I was approached by some people in civil society, especially in the human rights, accountability and governance, to help them set up a similar platform, but institutionalized. And that's how we started a project called Maskani ya Taifa. And basically what we set about to do was repair the image of civil society, because civil society, the reason the stories were spreading is because civil society had lost touch also with the people. So we started working to reconnect Kenyans with civil society and civil society with Kenyans. And part of that, one of the strategies was to make sure that we capture KOT, we capture one space that we could use for citizen engagement. And so we set about capturing KOT. And we can tell you in a nutshell, what we did was we identified people who are vocal about different issues, didn't matter what issue. If you like dogs, and you're very vocal about dogs on Twitter, and you're always sharing content on dogs, and then there's someone else who's talking about cats, we try to get you outside Twitter and have coffee, and then also get this person who talks about cats, and then talk about how you and that person, although you like two different things, but you're very passionate about what you like, might be more impactful if today you talked about cats together as two people who are active on Twitter with a following, and then tomorrow you talked about cats. So it's creating communities. I hope that makes sense. So we started working to create communities for people who had different passions, and very deliberately. And we were surprised how effective that was, because a lot of people who are vocal on social media were people who had looked for other spaces to engage and they couldn't find. And so they're going to that space. And like most of them did not have, people, yeah. And most of them did not have a social support system around their issues.
Yeah.
So when we started doing that, hosting Maskani conversations, bringing people together to discuss issues together, that went, it really caught, really captured the imagination of a lot of these local people. So became very popular. And we got to a point where now we had 14 hubs across the country, Nakuru, Kisumu, Mombasa, Kitui, Garissa, Wajir, Eldoret. All these are these spaces. And there we had people who were active on social media on different issues. And we would start engaging on WhatsApp, agree that they'd say, for example, with the Nakuru WhatsApp, they talk about tribalism or talk about plastic. There's a guy called James Wakibia who was very passionate about stopping plastic. And he had a hashtag ban plastic KE. And then what we do is that when you go online, we'd agree on Friday, you're going to talk about ban plastics KE. And then we'd mobilize all people from all these other hubs to be online for 2 hours on Friday. And so an unsexy hashtag would start trending, like constitution, like public participation, like, such. And we made that space the space where citizens could bring their issues. And then we would come in online at the same time. Of course, we kind of hacked the Twitter algorithms by ensuring that you have many people speaking about using the same hashtag for a particular period of time at the same time on a particular day. So that's how we started capturing, and then we started tweeting out what civil society was doing. We'd go to Uraia meetings, we'd go to Inuka Kenya meetings, and bring out reports. Civil society had a lot of reports that were sitting in their websites, were not being consumed by Kenyans. We tweet out those reports in response to questions. And Kenyans now started seeing, oh, this is a source of information that is factual here, because Itumbi, the propagandist, was saying that he's the one who talks about facts fast and whatever. We started providing, we became the real system near facts, and Kenyans enjoyed that because a lot of people on KOT are intellectual. They're not just, mindless people tweeting. So I think Kenyans appreciated that there's this information that is factual, that is useful to me. They'd ask a question and you direct them either to a website or download a PDF and share with them, and that kind of thing. And these people that we were also organizing, for example, in Nakuru, around conversations around tribalism, which was a big issue. Some of them started initiatives that are now, standing on their own. Shiko Kehika with the Tribeless Youth, which is now an organization. It was an initiative on Twitter. Maskani amplified that. People like Chef Okore, one of the founders of Siasa Place, came from Maskani. Wanjeri Nderu, who's now a top activist and media, occupying different media spaces. I opened her Twitter handle personally. I and Peter, my former boss, we did that and got her on Twitter. And many others, someone like Gabriel Oguda, who now has a column in The Nation. We published Maskani, we had a column, we negotiated a space with the Star called Maskani Conversations. And here the agreement was that they'll give us a page every week. And then on that page, we could publish people who are not in the mainstream and they will not edit. So that's how you got people like Owa, who was a blogger, who's now one of the top bloggers in the country. We were the first, Maskani was the first one to publish him. People like Gadara, although Gadara had written previously, but the media had stopped covering him because his articles had too much truth. So we started publishing him in the Star and others. Through that, KOT started taking its space. We are not taking the entire credit, but I think we gave KOT direction.
Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid of saying all these things, and then the government will do the same thing, will take a leaf from you and do the same thing?
I think they've already done. Now, if you look at KOT right now, there are too many paid hashtags paid for by politicians. So we have to try and figure out how to capture that space. But I think the way to do it is that they don't have the authenticity you and I have. And Kenyans can tell the difference between these fake. You're talking about issues that are well researched, you're quoting authorities. I mean, if you look at Ndi, as much as I don't like his politics right now, but Ndi is the one person who will insult you with a graph or with a pie chart of facts, you know, and you have no choice but to agree, because if you're arguing with facts and data that is actually from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, you cannot argue with that. This is research that has been done by professionals. So remember the way he took down Somkomalo, you know, and that's what KOT has become. It's a space where people who are factual can actually find their space.
So what are the ways? Okay, the government, you've said there are these paid hashtags, but what are the other ways in which they try to undermine the democratic expression of Kenyans?
Intimidation, arrests of people, vocal voices.
Like you.
I think, yeah, the guy, someone like Cyprian Nyakundi, I think even he's shutting down accounts. I know right now Angelina Deru and her team who are running Buyer Beware have had their group. It's a Facebook group. Have had it shut down. Also shut down for a month and a half, then they got it back. Now it's been shut down again. So you make sure that anywhere where Kenyans are having conversations, candid conversations about their politics, are shut down, or you intimidate the people who are lone voices in the wilderness. And I think the solution to that is that more people need to come together, and that's what we've been doing. You're an expert in education, so we amplify you. We find other experts in other things, we amplify them, and we also learn, we make sure that we educate ourselves, so that I know a lot about education now because of following you, and other people. I know a lot about economics and a lot of the history that I've learned about this country. I've learned from following D, because D is a big deal. Oh yeah, Surabaya. I don't know where he has disappeared.
He has been quiet, but
yeah. But you know, D as a Rhodes Scholar who also worked for the World Bank. I mean, and then stepped out into this other space, and now is critical of those guys that he used to work for. It's a very interesting space to be. So it's interesting when you see Kenyans who we talk about Kenyans seated in a one-room house in Githurai, insulting, this scholar. Of course, trolls, because part of the way the government tries to shut people up also is using trolls, paying people to come to your page and insult you, or insult Boniface Mwangi or this other person, which is, I find, a very, wasteful way of using natural Kenyan taxes and resources, because we could be doing better, like making our country better and serving our people better, rather than trolling those who are telling us to be better, who are asking us to be better.
And why does, for example, Boniface Mwangi, anytime he tweets, there are like 10, 15 trolls just spewing nonsense after every tweet?
Those guys are paid for, but of course there are people who feel like they are humanity and tribes. So, and by tribe I don't mean the ethnicity, but I mean groups where you identify with a certain group and then you want to defend that group. So there are people who love the people in power and they identify with them. There are people who buy those narratives of Uhuru Kenyatta is the richest man in Africa, and there are people who bought that narrative in 2013 that a rich person cannot steal. I think 9 years later, a lot of us have seen something different. Yeah. But there are people who still believe and want to protect that narrative, and they feel it's their obligations the obligation to protect them.
And then you were also talking about there are some accounts which are, like high traffic accounts, which also get some incentives to tweet and.
When you look at some of the guys who push narratives on behalf of the government, you have to ask yourself why they would push those narratives and what's their benefits. These guys, regardless of whether they are given money to push these narratives, I think what they do is choose a political side and align with it because it's beneficial to them. They are lawyers. These are maybe people who push business their way. And so you will find them being influencers on certain topics and topics that are political and shaping, and then the people who follow them end up swallowing, hook, line, and sinker, whatever they say. And I keep asking, what jurisprudence, what great legal thing has it done that is quoted by either legal students in university or any other space, apart from being famous on Twitter or maybe the celebrity status he gained? What else has he ever done that is legally, you would say, earth-shaking? When you talk about Orengo as father of the constitution, or someone like Otiende Omolo, I think their jurisprudence is known. What is the jurisprudence of some of these Twitter stars, Twitter lawyers, who have such a huge following? I think what they do is that they leverage that huge following for political favors, either to represent some of these politicians or government in some cases.
Okay.
And then they shape narratives on behalf of their friends in government. Yep.
All right. For many times we keep on seeing people saying, "Oh, you're just talking, this thing is going nowhere. It's just online. Not many Kenyans are online." But it sounds like from our conversation that there's actually an impact that we have as Kenyans through social media. So I just wanted you to talk about what's the hope you see, the potential you see for this kind of not activism, conversations on social media, especially for the future, and what would you tell Kenyans listening about the impact of what they do online?
So just on the word activism, people, a lot of people are uncomfortable with that word, and activism is basically asking questions why things are not the way they should be. And I don't think Kenyans should be uncomfortable. I think every Kenyan should be an activist in their space. If Kenyans were, because being an activist is basically being an active citizen. And if you look at, if a lot of Kenyans followed the BBI cases in the High Court and the Supreme Court. And what came out clearly is that our constitution, the 2020 constitution, was designed for active citizens. That's why public participation is emphasized all over. And that the judges really articulate. I love the political education that came out of those cases, is that if Kenyans don't get involved in a process, then it is invalid, it's null and void, and we used to accuse judges who try to implement the constitution, Mutunga, Olunga, Odunga, Mombengogi, as activists. But what is wrong with someone who wants to, what is wrong with being an activist if what you're calling for is the right thing? If I find a road has potholes and I ask, who's responsible for this road? If there's no water in my neighborhood and I ask, why is there no water? And I'm called an activist, what is wrong with me being an activist? So I believe every Kenyan should be an activist in whatever space they're in. If I work in a company and people are stealing money, then I should stand up for it. And so going forward is that what social media does, there are about 3 million Kenyans who log on to Twitter every day. There are more than now, I think, 9 million Kenyans who log on to Facebook every day. Every day, as in log on, check, and then log on. Not those, there are many more accounts, but those are the people who are active. If you look at the investment government has done on social media, from the time Uhuru got into State House, they had a fully fledged social media department, because of course they were a product of social media, of Cambridge Analytica.
Oh, yeah.
You can imagine how much they spent on Cambridge Analytica, and even now how much they're spending on these PR companies that are manipulating our social media and manipulating our narratives, controlling spaces. Then you realize how powerful that space is. If you see that every other government minister has a Twitter account, every department has a Twitter account. So that's a huge investment. And that means behind that minister and the PS, there's a whole team handling social media. They've employed teams to handle social media, because this person is not the one who's doing the actual social media. Maybe 1 or 2 posts, but most of the time it's done by teams. So imagine that heavy investment is not done for nothing. It's a recognition of how powerful this space is. And if Kenyans realize the power they have using, through Twitter and Facebook, and if we organize ourselves and organize our thoughts, so that we push narratives, we push back to this, our duty bearers, people we've employed to work for us by electing them to office, or whether they're employed with their civil servants. If you look at the time Kenyans got Olelenku fired, Kenyans got Waiguru fired, and many other people who have been, or government decisions that have been reversed. VAT on fuel, it was going to be 16%, which is wrong in itself, but they implemented 8%, which is also wrong. Right now, there's a push after the current increase in fuel. There's a push that has to be reversed. The Kenjokoma boys, we talked about them. Nobody would have known about them if it wasn't for social media. So the citizen journalists who took those videos and posted them on social media and it trended, the ones who picked them up and amplified, I shared them on my platforms, it forced for the first time a senior, a deputy commissioner of police to actually go to the home of those boys. Yet these extrajudicial killings have been happening, as I said, in Huruma, in Nairobi, in Mathare, every day. Every day young boys are being killed, young men are being killed, mostly young men are being killed. So social media is a powerful space for unorganized and active citizenry. So let's take up the challenge that was thrown to us by the High Court and the Supreme Court around the BBI. Let us participate. Let's not wait for these guys to bring some stupid laws like the BBI and then start crying that our politicians, we have the space to articulate these issues. And if you're very organized in that space, and we shape a narrative, and that narrative is picked up by Kenyans, because it's not only them who can shape narratives, you can also shape narratives. If those narratives are picked and adopted by Kenyans, and especially if they are factual, if they are based on facts and they are backed by evidence, then because the government listens to social media and the policymakers listen to social media. And even today, mainstream media picks stories from social media. I remember I've seen the nation apologizing after picking up a story and not researching it and then running with it. That's because they want to stay relevant. That's how social media has become. So let's use this space for our own governance and to be actually, social media, I believe, should eventually evolve to be the space for public participation. If people are busy in their jobs or in their farms or in their matatus or in their whatever they work and cannot attend a public participation meeting, they should be able to participate using social media. And I think that technology exists for people to express their views and or even vote. I wouldn't be surprised if we build trust into our electoral system if we could vote in the digital space too. If we can do M-Pesa, billions of transactions, billions of shillings in transactions every year, hundreds of billions, no, every month, every day actually, more than 100 billion every day transactions on M-Pesa. Even voting we can, if we build in trust. So that's how I see the future going.
Okay, so because I am in the arts, I want you to end our conversation with saying something about the importance of stories and narratives. Because even social media, that's what it's about. It's about the stories we tell.
So, and I think that's around what we started with asking about where we've come from as Kenyans and where we're going. Stories are important in terms of people identifying with us. They're very powerful. When I tell you a story about myself, and I tell you a story about the challenges I've come across, and then how I overcame those challenges. And if you identify with that story, it humanizes you. And so our politicians have become very adept at doing that. It's what you're calling the victim mentality. But you also need to start telling positive stories, because Kenyans are, despite the governance challenges, Kenyans are triumphing every day. So stories of triumph, stories of of overcoming, but also stories of having fun, of traveling, of going places, of meeting new people, of inventing new things. These are the stories that are missing from our media, because these are the stories that humanize us. And we have stories of doom and gloom in the media, because you are supposed to be kept at a certain anxiety level. There are people who yes, there are people who die if they don't watch news. Yes. They feel like they are missing something. They can even, like, if you switch the TV from news when they're watching, they can even hit you with something. That shows the power of stories. But again, those are negative stories, because we are being fed with negativity, so you can remain negative and anxious and looking for saviors. So we need to tell more positive stories. Looking for saviors. Yeah, our politicians cast themselves as saviors. From enemy. Nowadays, you're talking about peace. And I'm wondering which Kenyan is fighting who so to get peace. Yes, we have skirmishes here and there, like happening in Laikipia, most probably sponsored by one politician or the other. But Kenyans generally are peaceful. We live together. If I don't have sugar, I come to your house, you give me sugar or salt or whatever, and we stay in the same neighborhood, you travel in the same vehicles. We are peaceful. We are never at war with each other until elections come. Actually, usually, most of the time, it's until 5 o'clock on voting day. Then after that, chaos starts. After we are unable to count votes, because we don't know how to count votes. So we vote peacefully, and then
we can count voters, but we can't count votes.
We can't count votes, Yeah. So stories are important. And I think it's stories that are going to liberate this country. So we need to keep telling stories. We need to keep telling our history. Because again, as I said, if you don't know where you're coming from, then you don't know where you're going. And stories also pass on knowledge. This is how traditionally Africans used to pass on knowledge. I think a lot of my moral or my values, let me use that. My values are shaped by the stories that I was told when I was young, of the rabbit and the lion and the hare. Not the hare, not the rabbit. We didn't have rabbits in Africa, we had hares. The hares and the hyena and the elephant and the giraffe, and all these moral choices that they had to make. And which of these moral choices tells me this is the right way and this is the wrong way to behave. So stories are very powerful, and we need to keep telling more.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Mutemi, for such an interesting conversation. And I hope Kenyans will believe in themselves that they can actually influence the country from wherever they are. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to Kenyans on this platform. And yes, we are running countries as Kenyans. We are running very democratic countries out there. I think if you go to Southern Africa, there are a lot of Kenyans in the civil service. We are running global organizations. What we need to do, as you said, is believe in ourselves and believe that we can run our country better. Allow me this just before.
Yes, yeah.
We allowed somebody who has never run anything to run a country. You know, someone who had never run a kiosk or anything to become president of this country and run a country of over 40 million Kenyans. Maybe now we need to look for people who have run things and they have a CV of running things. And when I look around at the current politicians, I can't see, apart from those who have benefited from being, you know, tenderpreneuring, I can't see many who have actually run something from, you know, created something and, you know, ran it and made it successful. And I think that's where we need to start. Let's believe in ourselves and let's look for those who are able from within us, because the WACO, they are there. There are many of us who are able to lead this country.